All right, folks, for today's remote lesson, I'm going to be doing a poem. We've done a couple of poems so far, but I think it's good to have multiple examples of different types of poetry. This particular poem obviously has some connections to stuff that we've talked about in the book. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through the poem, analyze it with you, and hopefully that will help you answer the questions much easier. You are welcome to attempt the questions without listening to this video, but I do not recommend it. There is a lot of figurative language in this poem, and it's a little hard to parse through without a guide unless you're just really good at poetry and figurative language. So according to our poetry TPCast process, the first thing that we always look at is the title. Now, in this case, the title is fairly self-explanatory. So if the poem is called Courage, then odds are good that the poem is about courage. So very nice one-word title there. Now, the second thing that we do, the P in TPCast, is we must paraphrase. We must kind of put things in our own words. In order to put things in our own words, we must read the poem. So I'll do that next, and then we'll start working through that. It is in the small things we see it. The child's first step, as awesome as an earthquake. The first time you rode a bike, wallowing up the sidewalk. The first spanking when your heart went on a journey all alone. When they called you crybaby, or poor, or fatty, or crazy, and made you into an alien, you drank their acid and concealed it. Later, if you faced the death of bombs and bullets, you did not do it with a banner. You did it with only a hat to cover your heart. You did not fondle the weakness inside you, though it was there. Your courage was a small coal that you kept swallowing. If your buddy saved you and died himself in so doing, then his courage was not courage. It was love. Love as simple as shaving soap. Later, if you have endured a great despair, then you did it alone, getting a transfusion from the fire, picking the scabs off your heart, then wringing it out like a sock. Next, my kinsman, you powdered your sorrow, you gave it a back rub, and then you covered it with a blanket, and after it had slept a while, it woke to the wings of the roses and was transformed. Later, when you face old age and its natural conclusion, your courage will still be shown in little ways. Each spring will be a sword you'll sharpen. Those you love will live in a fever of love, and you'll bargain with the calendar. And at the last moment, when death opens the back door, you'll put on your carpet slippers and stride out. Okay, so in order to effectively paraphrase a poem, we have to know what all of the words mean. I'm going to go over some words I commonly get asked about, and hopefully I answer all of your questions. If not, then you have Google. You can look things up. So the first word I usually get asked about is wallowing. So wallowing can be used in a few different contexts. It's usually used to describe some sort of erratic or unstable motion. So I'm sure you've seen someone try and ride a bike for the first time. Maybe you've, remember trying to ride a bike for the first time yourself. And, you don't ride straight and true the first time around. You kind of wobble a little all over the place. So that would be wallowing. Okay. I think I've been asked about concealed before, but to conceal, to cover up something, to hide something. Let's see. I think that's all for the first couple stanzas. I have been asked about endured before. So if you are enduring something, then you are tolerating something. You're standing it. It's as much as you can take. So if you have endured a great despair, you have been through this despair. Transfusion, I commonly get asked about. I'm sure you're probably familiar with transfusion in terms of blood. If you get a blood transfusion, then they are kind of changing your blood. The prefix trans always has to refer to change, transfer, or transgender, or something like that. So that has to do with change. So a transfusion is like switching out something old for something new. Wringing, you may be familiar with, like kind of like twisting something out. Like if you have like a wet garment and you kind of wring out the water. Kinsman is just another word for kin, basically, a single relative or family member, your kin. And let's see, I think that might be all. Okay, so those are common words I get asked about. So now that we understand those, we understand the actions a little bit better. All of these examples that we have here, we're going to break them down in a moment, but essentially, to understand what the purpose of these examples is, we really have to interpret this first line. It is in the small things we see it. Now, if you understand what it is referring to, then the poem comes together a lot better. If you don't, it's much more confusing. So you'll notice that even though the poem is called Courage, the word courage isn't in here very much. It's a brief appearance in the second stanza, pops up once in the last stanza. So for the most part, we're meant to understand that all of these examples are courage. So it is in the small things we see it. The it is courage. So all of these examples are examples of courage. And Anne Sexton, our author, is trying to insist that courage is even more important in the little things. It's not just the crazy, heroic, grand gestures. It's the little stuff in life is where we see true courage. Now, let's break down what courage is. So the C in TPCast is connotations. So that includes all types of figurative language. So I'm going to go through each stanza and point out types of figurative language, and I'll label them so that you know what type of figurative language they are. The main ones that I'm going to be looking for are simile, which is a comparison using the word like or as, metaphor, which is a comparison not using the word like or as, personification, where you're giving human qualities to something that is not human, and alliteration shows up in here a little bit. And alliteration is when you have similar sounds at the beginning of a word. So Sally sells seashells by the seashore. Got lots of S's in there. So, all right. So in the first stanza, the first thing we really get is the child's first step as awesome as an earthquake. So that is a pretty straightforward simile. I'll just put an S for simile. So we are comparing the awesomeness of the child's first step to the awesomeness of the earthquake. So this child's first step is an act of courage. Let's see, what else do we have? Okay, so next one that's really figurative language is here. Your heart went on a journey all alone. Now, last time I checked, your heart could not vacate your body and make traveling plans. So that is giving human qualities to something that is not human, but a part of a human. So it's a form of personification. All right. Now, the next one, while you can definitely be called mean names, made you into an alien, that's a little bit not so literal. That's a bit more metaphorical. Likewise, I hope you are not literally drinking acid. So that would be some metaphorical language as well. So just within that first stanza, 4 pretty straightforward examples of figurative language describing acts of courage. First step, riding a bike, getting a spanking, getting bullied and called names. All of those are courage. All right, next stanza. Okay, so in this stanza, we start to get an example of alliteration. So here we see bombs and bullets. So that is alliteration, the repetition of the B sound at the beginning of those words. We also get some more metaphors here. Fondle the weakness inside you. And actually, I have been asked about fondle before as a vocabulary term. To fondle something, it's a synonym for the word touch, but it's like you're touching it to an extreme. You are loving on it. And since we cannot actually physically touch our own weakness, that would be a metaphor. Another very straightforward metaphor here is we have a comparison between courage and a coal, like a coal from a fire. So that is also a metaphor because it does not use the word like or as, which is what would make it a simile. Let's see. Okay. Here we have another comparison of courage to love. We are comparing those two qualities. Though they are not the same, we are saying they are similar in some way. And then we close it out with love as simple as shaving soap. So that's another simile there. So lots and lots of stuff going on in this second paragraph as well. Going through war, facing our fears and our weaknesses, someone sacrificing themselves in your name or in your honor. So all of those, good courage. Okay, next up, third stanza, do a new color, purple. Okay. Okay, so here, transfusion, based on our understanding of the word transfusion, it would probably be a very painful thing to literally get a fire transfusion. So we're going to assume that that's kind of metaphorical fire, the fire burning inside of you. Likewise, I would hope that picking scabs off your heart, also metaphor, since we do not want anyone reaching inside of their body to pick scabs off their heart. Wringing it out like a sock. We have a little simile hidden within the metaphor there about going through despair. Everyone has a moment of intense grief or despair in their life that they must suffer through, and that is courage. Now, this section down here, I'm sure you probably detected some figurative language, but it's kind of incredible how much it goes on. So next, my kinsman, you powdered your sorrow. You gave it a back rub, it being the sorrow. Then you covered it, the sorrow, with a blanket. And after it, the sorrow, had slept a while, it, the sorrow, woke to the wings of the roses and was transformed. So this entire section here is one big, long personification. So we are personifying sorrow and giving sorrow these human qualities, the ability to be covered with a blanket and sleep and wake and all of that. So this paragraph focuses on grief, despair, sorrow. Going through those things is courage indeed. Okay, last stanza. Now in our last stanza, we have blue. A little bit more figurative language. Face old age. It's kind of a colloquialism more than a metaphor, but I've had some people point it out as a metaphor. One cannot literally face old age, so it can be a potential figurative language there. This one is definitely straightforward figurative language. Spring will be a sword. Last time I checked, spring was not indeed a sword. So that is definitely a metaphor comparing spring and a sword. Fever of love is another one that some people point out as, well, it's kind of metaphorical. You can't really have like a love fever. Sure. And then a couple more straightforward examples. Bargain with the calendar. Now, I definitely have never had an actual conversation with my calendar, so that would be personification. And then death opens the back door. We often think of death in a personified way, kind of the Grim Reaper figure, but literally, death itself cannot open doors. So death opening the back door is definitely some more personification there. Okay, so now that we have seen all of these examples of courage, let's step back a little bit and start looking at big picture. When we're thinking about the way that the poem shifts, the way that it moves, it's part of our TP-Cast process. Think about the evolution. We don't see multiple shifts in this poem. I will go ahead and say that. Kind of each stanza has its own little shift, and you can see that transition with the word later. Later, that's kind of a shift signal. So the question is, how does it shift? What does it shift from? What does it shift to? So think about the examples we see in the beginning. Child's first step, first time you rode a bike, getting bullied as a child. So it's all focusing on child experiences, things that a young person would go through. And then things start evolving. We have someone who's going through a war. Well, not many children in war, so we assume that they are older now. Then going through great grief and sorrow and despair. Sure, you can have sorrow at any age, but a lot of times we associate loss and sorrow with being older. You start to lose loved ones more when you have aged, typically. And then finally, old age, death. So the shift in each stanza takes us progressively through this person's life, from the first moment that they start out in this world to their last moment that they have. Another thing that is interesting about this poem, and this is rare, if you know anything about perspective in terms of poetry and in terms of literature, typically most literature is one of two perspectives. So there's first-person perspective, like To Kill a Mockingbird. Scout is telling us the story from her perspective. She uses I, me, she's a character, she's part of the story. And then there's third-person perspective, where, sometimes you might kind of be in a character's head, but the narrator is not a character in the story. They're outside the story telling you about what's happening. Now, the one that you don't see very often, I'm sure you guys can count, there's a number missing here, is second-person perspective. So in first-person perspective, you see a lot of I, me. In third-person perspective, the pronouns are typically he, she, they. In second-person perspective, your pronouns are not the same as first or third. So take a look at the poem, see what kind of pronouns, and pronoun is just a word that can replace a noun, what kind of pronouns do you see a whole lot of? The first time you rode a bike, the first spanking when your heart went on a journey, when they called you crybaby and made you into an alien, and you, it's everywhere. So in second person perspective, the reason it's so rare is because the author of the poem is speaking directly to the reader. Now, obviously in a book, this would be pretty hard to do. The entire book talking to the person reading the book, it would be a bit strange, which is why we don't see it very often. In a poem, it's a little bit easier. So here, the author, she very well could have said, the first time that a child rides a bike, or the first spanking when a baby, but she says you, your, you, these shared universal experiences that many of us go through. She wanted to emphasize us, the reader, and engage us and challenge us, to show this courage that she is describing to us. So those are some special things about poem. If we're thinking about, big picture themes, that's one of our last things in TPcast. Well, they made it real easy for us this time. So if you say that the theme of the poem is something other than courage, I may be a little off track. Definitely is about courage and bravery and going through things in life and facing life, and, just being a part of things. So anyways, that is our poetry analysis. Now, looking at, wait, let me get my pointer back. Looking at the questions. If you were paying attention during the video, a lot of these should be very, very easy. The only questions that I consistently see people having some problems with, the second part of question number 4, make sure you answer it for one thing. Some people give me a couple examples of personification and then just, move on. But when I ask how do these images affect you as a reader, I mean that, like, how did these specific examples of personification that you chose, how were they meant to make the reader think or feel? So, I mean, authors, put personification in there for a reason. They think it's going to be more effective in some way. How did it affect you? Or how was it meant to affect you? Sometimes when I say, how did it affect you? People are like, well, it didn't affect me at all. That's not really what I'm asking. How was it supposed to affect you? How did the author want it to affect you? Okay. And then the other one some people get tripped up on is Atticus's definition of courage. Just keep in mind that if you've completed the chapter 9 through 11 questions, you literally had to tell me Atticus's definition of courage. So if you look on like the very last page of chapter 11, you can find it again. But hopefully you already have that, and you may even be able to just like copy and paste it from your chapter 9 through 11 questions and put it in here, because it's the same. It hasn't changed at all. I just want you to contrast it with the speaker's definition of courage, which is a little different from what Atticus thinks. So think about, all the examples that she gave, and, if you were to ask her, well, based on all these samples, how would you define courage? What do you think she would say? So, okay. And I think that is all for our poetry analysis remote lesson.